Okay. What are the deployment modes in Spark? So very, very important question. It's a sure interview questions in most cases. Okay. So what are the deployment modes in Spark? Okay. So first, let's understand what does it actually mean. So you write a Spark application, right? So you write a Spark program. So you need to run the Spark job, right? So where you run the Spark job matters, right? So you can run this. So that is what it's a deployment mode. It's where you are deploying. So you can deploy this in the client mode. You can also deploy it in the cluster mode. Okay, so these are the two important two modes that you can deploy your code. Okay, now why this is very important? Because once you deploy it, it builds the DAX, it talks to the yarn, it schedules all the tasks, collects all that information. Basically, your entire job runs, right? So when to use a client mode, when to use a cluster mode. But before even when to use each of these, what exactly is a client mode? What exactly is a cluster mode? So you have a cluster. So a cluster can have many different nodes, right? So let's say these are different nodes within that cluster, and you develop the code in your local system, which is basically you are writing the code in laptop. So you have all the code written here, and if you want to execute, you can execute this code here in the laptop, right? So which is your local machine. So that mode is called as a client mode because you are executing you're executing the code on your laptop. But if you want to if you execute this code in the cluster in one of the nodes here in the cluster, then it will become a cluster mode. So that's the basic difference. If you're executing this code in your machine, that will become a client mode. And if you're executing this in the cluster, in one of the cluster machine, it will become a cluster mode. Okay. Now, important to understand, right? Where we need to use a cluster, where you need to use a client mode. Okay. So what happens in the client mode? So you are running in your local machine, right? Here you are running in the cluster machine. As a user, you have to monitor because if it's your own laptop, other people will not have access to the laptop. And obviously, the network dependency is high because if you get disconnected, if your Wi-Fi or anything gets disconnected, it's not good. So when it is useful when you want to develop. Okay, so let me just make a note here so that we are clear on all the features that we just talked. So let's say this is a feature, this is client mode, and this is this is cluster mode. So we're talking about the driver where it runs. A driver is basically the program that is running, right? So client mode is in your local system, which is machine, and this runs in the cluster, one of the nodes in the cluster. So monitoring, you have to monitor it, the user. Here it gets monitored using yarn, right? Network dependency is there. Yes, there is high network dependency. Here it's low dependency. So use case, right? So when you develop a code in the development, right? So you can use this mode. So you would and also you will use for debugging. So let's say you are writing the code for the first time, right? If you are writing the code, you need to test it and everything. So in the development, you use your local machine, develop it, test it, debug it, and then you push it to the client. And if you are running in production, you cannot rely on your system, right? Because other people may also use, obviously they will use. So that is where you will have to use a cluster mode. Okay. And important thing is like when you're doing a Spark Submit, right? Spark Submit is basically where you are submitting a job. When you are doing Spark Submit, your laptop should be alive because if you close the laptop, the Spark Submit, everything goes off, right? So you need to be alive. In production, you can disconnect your laptop because it runs in one of the cluster. Cluster is always running, right? Again, cluster keeps running. So if somebody closes the cluster, then it's a different scenario. But otherwise, your cluster will keep running. So it will run in one of the. So in simple sentence, right? For development, right? You're developing something, you're debugging something, you can use the client mode, but for production, that has to be a cluster mode. So this is the basic thing, right? All right. So that's all you need to understand where you to use the cluster mode, where you need to use for production, cluster mode, for development or debugging, use the client mode, right? Okay. That is all I have, and I'll see you guys in my next session.